Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. Today's special guest is Jeff Russo. You know him as the co founder of the band Tonic. He is now the composer of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. Now, join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Russo. I'm a very big fan of yours. Thank you so much for joining the Traversing the Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
It's definitely my pleasure. Every once in a while, you get a guest that you feel just really honored to have the opportunity to talk with, and you're one of those guests. I was like, "Holy shit, he's coming on my show."
I mean, okay, I appreciate that. That sounds a little too much for me. For me.
What inspired you to decide to dedicate yourself to music, and who were your earliest inspirations?
What inspired me to dedicate myself to music? I just loved music. I've always loved music. I loved listening to music. I loved playing music. I was the kid who just walked up to a piano and just started banging on like my cousin's piano. And I went to my cousin's house,
Yeah.
and my school made you choose an instrument in the fourth grade, and that was sort of like the thing that I started to do. But I think that listening to pop and rock music when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, all in there really did sort of inspire me to want to play. And I was a drummer first. I played drums until I decided that the guitar player in the band that I was playing in got all the girls. So I wanted to be a guitar player. I wanted all that attention too, and the drummers didn't get that attention. So I started playing guitar after that, and I would say like, you know, uh, people ask like who's your biggest influence, and I would say like I don't know that I have one biggest influence in terms of what I like to do musically, but I will say that guitar playing, David Gilmour is, I would say, my biggest inspiration. Like
Mm,
a person who played the guitar in a way that I wanted to emulate, like in a way that I wanted to make those sounds that he made, and I thought it was really really special and great and connected with me in a way that no other music had. Um, and it might have been the weed that I was smoking when I was a kid, but um,
You're supposed to
uh,
when you listen to David Gilmour, though.
yeah, it was so funny. It was one of those times I was with a friend of mine. His name's Peter. Um, I was 15 maybe, and I'd been playing drums, and I had heard records and really loved music and was already playing it. And he was like, we were smoking weed. We were 15. We were smoking weed. That's what 15-year-olds did on the East Coast in the 80s. And he said, "Have you heard The Wall?" And I said, "No, I hadn't heard The Wall." So he was like, "Oh man," he passed me the bong, and and then he proceeded to play The Wall, and
Mm,
I'll never forget. Like it was I was stunned into submission
mm.
and silence, and then a song called Mother um, played, and I at that moment I was like, I forget drumming. I want to be a guitar player, and that was, I would say, that was the thing that really made me want to do that.
Oh, I mean, David Gilmour and and Pink Floyd is one of those bands and one of those musicians that sounds always like him. You know what I'm saying? There's people who seem to be easily emulating a lot of other bands, but when you hear Gilmour, you know it's Gilmour. Like right off the bat, like Momentary Lapse
Yeah,
of Reason, Division Bell, you know it's Gilmour.
yeah, it's funny. You mentioned later Floyd, which was when it was just him and the rest of the band, as opposed to the original.
Mm,
Or I wouldn't even say the original lineup, but the secondary lineup.
yeah,
And
post Barrett.
post Barrett, right? Um, and yes, I love those records too. But there's something about like metal, and there's something about Dark Side of the Moon. There's
Mm,
something about Wish You Were Here.
Final
Um,
Cut.
Final Cut is an interesting record, and I actually really like Final Cut, but it doesn't really make me feel like Floyd did
Mm,
before that.
mm.
And you could kind of tell that they were phoning it in at that point. And then you know uh, when they continued the band after Final Cut, you could see it, you could hear it in it that it was sort of a renaissance for them. Like
Mm,
that that David Gilmour was now, since he was more in control of the band and what the band was doing songwriting wise and singing wise. Because yeah, I mean, he was obviously like the better singer. And he was obviously the one who sang the songs that needed to be sung, even if he didn't them. Um, when he took over the band, you could hear in the writing that it was, it was like, oh, okay, now there's a different focus.
mm.
It's more of that thing, and I really love that as well. Division Bell's a great record. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I love the Pink Floyd music. I must well post Barrett, the true psychedelic of Barrett. I must admit, I never quite caught on with, but like I said, when Dark Side of the Moon and post that, there are some just genius records. I mean, the songs are
I mean,
beautifully
there's post
written,
Barrett.
and
There's certainly post Barrett after. I mean, before Dark Side, that was really great. Like I said, Metal is probably one of my favorite Pink Floyd records.
mm,
Um, you know, and then there's a later record. Animals is
mm.
such an amazing album, such an amazing album, and that's a very, very, it's underrated Pink Floyd album in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, even the song like Pigs on the Wing, just fantastic.
Dogs is good too. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, definitely, definitely, that's a great record. And I could go on and talk for hours about Pink Floyd.
Well, we'll have to have a special Pink Floyd episode where we just talk Pink Floyd on another show. So I mean, you're obviously an extremely accomplished musician. I mean, both as a composer and also as a rock star as well. Where does your training come from? Did you is it more sort of self-taught? Did you go to university and expand your musical knowledge and training?
No, I'm self-taught. I I took a couple of guitar lessons when I was in high school, I think. But I never really studied music. I listened to records and I figured out how to play guitar, I figured out how to play drums, I figured out how to play piano and figured out how to play lots of things. And then in writing more orchestral music in sort of the second part of my musical odyssey, um, I sort of figured out how to do that. Like what does a violin do? What does this do? And what does that do? And I don't pretend to know so many of the things that there are to know about
Mm,
writing orchestral music. I write from a very melodic point of view. Um, I'm not the kind of writer that writes, like um, what's the word? Uh, I, you know, I'm not the kind of person who writes music that sounds like the person really knows what they're doing. It's virtuosic. I don't write virtuosic style orchestral music. Because I'm not virtuosic. I don't have the knowledge. I know
mm,
a lot more now than I did 5 ago. And I rely on books to tell me, like, oh, the violin can't do this or can do that. And you know, orchestrational books and orchestrators that tell me like this is not going to sound as good as this might in the same way because of the way it's going to resonate, or the
mm,
way the band sounds together when they're playing. So, you know, being self-taught has its upside and its downside. Like the upside is I don't know the rules, so I don't care about the rules.
right, right.
And I've always been, the kind of writer who doesn't give a shit about rules, because once you have rules, the art sort of goes out the window,
Mm,
right? So there's obviously certain rules to the craft of writing music for picture. I'm looking at picture that I'm, writing to right now. And yeah, so I got to figure out how do I hit that downbeat? That's math, that's like how many quarter notes are going to make it until I get there. And then I subdivide to eighths or sixteenths. And, I can figure out how to make that one hit and how to fix the tempo and what's going to work in order to get from one place to another. And that's craft, but in terms of, I remember somebody saying like, you can't move in fifths, like moving fifths, like you can't do that. And I was like, what do you mean you can't do that? Who said you can't do that? Well, it's a known rule. I'm like, what does that even mean? A known rule? Like, to me, if it sounds good, it must be good. And that's subjective, right? So like
Mm.
something that I think sounds good, you might not think sounds good. And that not being tied to those rules because I didn't have a conservatory education, and I didn't go to music school. I didn't take, I just learned by listening. I'm not I'm not bound to that. I can basically do whatever I want.
Now,
Which I hope that people who even know what to, like know all those rules will still abandon those rules because those rules are meant to be a guide, but not to be, not to be the gospel.
now, having that you were you're a co-founder of the band Tonic, um, having worked in a band, and which is, I would assume, a somewhat democratic system where there's discussion of how you're going to play certain music and whatnot. When you're talking about composing, which is, you said, is also a large group where other composers are discussing things with you, and the orchestra is also playing with you. Does that experience of working within a band setting help you to also work within an orchestra setting?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that if you're a good collaborator, you're a good collaborator. And like, in order to be in a band, I think that you have to be able to be a good collaborator. Um, and I think the same with composing. Like, yeah, I sit in a room alone and I write music, but that's all meaningless until you stand in an orchestra and they all play it, or you talk to your orchestrator, you talk to your editor, I mean, there's but just like so many different people who can be involved in the creation of music for picture. That if you're not able to be a good collaborator, you're not going to be great at this job. You might be really great at writing music, but that's not 100% of the gig. That's a small percentage of the gig is to sit and write music. You also have to be able to collaborate with a bunch of people. So I think that my experience being in a band and knowing how to navigate collaborative effort has really lent itself well for me in my sojourn into composing music for film, television.
Is your when you're creating your or composing music for, as we'll discuss, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, is your approach to composing music the same as your approach to composing music for the songs that when you were in a band? Is it similar in how you go about that construction?
Well, I mean, there are similarities, and then there are a lot of stark differences. Like, I don't write with the same form in mind. Like when I'm sitting down to write a song, I think about it in terms of, okay, so this is the verse and this is the chorus. I mean, I sort of come from a pop music background, so I tend to write songs in a way that is more like a pop song. I don't, or I try actually not to write um, orchestral film music or orchestral television music or even non-orchestral music for film and television or video games or whatever, in the same way, because it doesn't really work. Like it can only it works sometimes but not really. Like it's much more linear than it is repetitive.
Hmm.
um, it can be repetitive in terms of motific writing, like you can hear a motif over and over again and played differently, but it's still more linear where you hear it across a longer period of time, as opposed to you hear it, then you hear the next section, then you go back, and then you hear it again, and then you hear the next section, and you go back. It doesn't really work in the same way. So I'd say that the answer is yes and no, mostly no.
Some way, I won't say the voice of Star Trek, but you're the music of Star Trek is now you, because you're doing the two primary live action shows. And
There are a lot of great composers in the Star Trek universe, and I would not consider myself to be the musically voice of Star Trek. I think that with Star Trek Discovery and working on the first two seasons, at least of Picard, I have been a big part of reintroducing what Star Trek music is in a modern sense. But Chris
hmm,
Westlake is doing a fantastic job of writing music for Lower Decks. Nami Malamud is doing a fantastic job on on um, on Prodigy, and she will be a big voice in the Star Trek world. She's fantastic, as I don't know if you know who she is, but she's been working on it. Giacchino wrote the music for the new movies, and whether or not he will do that again for another movie or what we'll do is still unknown. But I think that Star Trek in general has had a wide ranging number of composers from, in the original series there were like something like 12 different composers, 14 different
Oh
composers,
wow.
some I'd have to actually look, maybe it's like 7 or 8, but there were a lot. It wasn't just Alexander Courage wrote a couple of episodes and wrote the theme. There have been a number of composers writing on the movies. There's Jerry Goldsmith, there's James Horner, there's Cliff Idleman. But there have been a number of composers doing the movies, a number of composers doing the television series. Obviously, the and I'm sure that we will continue that way of doing things. Like there's just there's a very broad musical outlook for Star Trek, and I think that that's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Now, were you a fan of Star Trek prior to becoming a composer for Star Trek, or is that something as you got the gig you went back and and immerse yourself within the music?
Well, I'll tell you that while I was on tour in 1996, my girlfriend at the time would send me VHS tapes of The Next Generation. I was watching it. I've been a fan of Star Trek since I was a kid.
Mm.
And I really became a huge fan of the franchise after I'd seen the movies and I got into The Next Generation. That's when I really sort of became obsessed with it. So it wasn't something that I needed to go back and revisit. I've been listening to Star Trek music and watching Star Trek, since I was a kid.
Well, and I think when you listen to your music, there's definitely, at least from when I'm listening to it, some throwback to other prior Star Trek that makes the listeners of it go, I see what you did there. That's really cool. Like, I think everyone is going to agree with, when the Star Trek Discovery opening theme, the beautiful theme, and then right at the end, you touch on that original Star Trek theme, and it was like, that's like such a nice, sweet touch.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much music. There's so much great iconic music. I mean, certainly the fanfare from the original series is one of the most iconic pieces of film television music ever written,
Mm.
and one of the most memorable. So, why not utilize that? One of the things that is great about Star Trek is doing that is my easiest path to get a response from the viewer.
Mm.
So I tend to do that a lot. When a big moment happens in Picard, I'll play the fanfare from the Next Generation theme, which is from the original motion picture.
Mm.
Or when Voyager appears, I might use the Voyager theme, you know what I mean? Or when Seven of Nine appeared, certainly in season one, I was like, oh, why don't I just Voyager theme?
Yeah.
Um, you know, those kinds of things are really fun for me. So I do it for two reasons. One, because I know it's going to be effective with the fans, and two, because I'm a fan and it's effective with me. Like I've sat there and I've been, I've written the theme and gone, and I do that and I go, oh, yeah, of course, that's what I got to do here. It's like really want to bring out that feeling in people. So that makes my job much easier.
One like the opening for one question I definitely had when the opening theme of Picard, okay,
Mm.
starts off which I think are flutes. If I'm wrong, let me know. And that
There's a
reminded me
piccolo,
of Piccolo, but it kind of reminded me of the episode in the Next Generation called The Inner Light, where he starts playing that kind of instrument. I was wondering if that was an intentional connection to
yeah,
that
of course.
episode.
Of course it was. Like
Yeah.
one of the very first things I said to Alex Kurtzman, he's the sort of architect of the new Star Trek series, was I think it would be a great idea to connect somehow to that moment. It's a musical moment in the series, and why not tell Picard's story? So using a flute at the beginning there is intentional to go back to the Resican flute that he played in the Inner Light. There's also a nod to the melody that the character's son plays, which is a tip of the hat, a very slight tip of the hat to that little piece of music. And I thought it would be a really nice thing to sort of incorporate that into our new main title theme for him.
I must admit, once again, as a fan, I just thought that was such genius because I heard that and it just brought me back to that episode. I was because it in the 7 year 7 years that Next Generation played, there's so many different episodes, so many great moments, but there was something so nice and gentle and memorable by that scene where he's just playing by himself, especially right at the end after he realizes,
Mhm.
it wasn't real, and it's so touching. And the thing is, I think that touch right at the end when and it's such a like uh, such an important emotional moment in that scene, and it kind of defined that entire episode. And then hearing it in Picard again, so many years later, and having focus on him with and it was, I think it shows. I think that you were a true fan in picking it out. And
Well, but I feel like that moment in that episode was a defining moment in the lifetime of Picard, and I
mm,
that's what I felt was so important about somehow tying to that and incorporating that, because what am I doing? I'm doing music for Picard. And how can I tie the character of Picard to music, right?
mm,
Like, and that is, he lived an entire lifetime in 20 minutes in that episode, right? Was,
mm.
was that what they said? It was 20 minutes that he was out.
Oh, I don't remember the
Um,
details, but yeah,
I think it's he was out for he asks the question. He's like, "How long was I out?" And they say about 20 minutes. Um, but the idea that he lived an entire lifetime and mastered an instrument, and then after that was able to play it because he had the memories of it all.
yeah.
Um, it felt important enough and pivotal enough in his life to make a difference in the story that we were telling now, which is that we are telling his, sort of like the back half of his life. And I think that it had a profound impact on his life. So I wanted it to have a profound impact on the musical storytelling.
When you are approaching creating a piece, and I mean, I didn't realize how many different pieces there were per album until once again I checked. I mean, I think Discovery had season 3 has like 40 pieces. Picard had like 54 pieces,
Well,
and
you have to remember that I can't put all of the music on the soundtracks. So we're talking about hours upon hours upon hours of music for each one of those episodes. Like, so I've done to date, I've done about 50 episodes of Discovery alone.
yeah,
Each one of those episodes has 40 some odd minutes of music. I mean, you're talking you know, about 40 hours of music, thousands of pieces of music. Um, and I put 40 on there because I sort of try to pick the 40 that I really like. I mean, I like them all, but I can't pick them all. So, I get emails from people like, why didn't you put this one thing on the soundtrack? I'm like, I didn't even think of that one piece of music. I
yeah.
can't even go back and listen to it all, because it's too much to go through,
When when you're thinking about composing any particular piece, um, how do you go about doing it? Are you looking for the heart of a particular of a character in a scene? Is there an overall theme of the moment that you're trying to capture, or like I said, are you trying to pick a voice of a character in that moment that you see the character the scene through?
But I think it's different with every scene, with everything I do. Like I just watch. Usually, I just sit and I watch a scene and wonder, like, how am I going to approach this? And I usually just sit down at my piano or whatever keyboard and sketch something out as it plays. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's usually looking for the emotional connection. Whatever it's really important that I always only score what a character is feeling and not what a character is doing. That's very important to me. So, I try to get into the head of the character or get into the heads of the characters that I'm looking at and I'm trying to help support their story.
Now, obviously, Discovery and Picard are in many ways very different stories. Once again, one is a story through the eyes of one man who goes, you're kind of following his journey, and the character we're all familiar with and has a history that the fans have. Discovery is a bunch of new characters and a multiple, faceted cast. Is that Does that change how you view the construction of both albums?
I I sort of take everything on an individual basis. I don't really look at anything tied to anything else. It's all about like what am I doing for a specific moment? What am I doing for a specific specific episode, or what am I doing for a specific character, or what am I doing for a specific show? I try not to do the same things in both shows, but sometimes there's crossover. Like there are moments where, I've played the Courage theme in both shows. I played a Klingon theme in one, not in the other, because there wasn't a Klingon. But there was a Romulan, and there wasn't so it's like I try to just keep it separated.
I think one of the most interesting pieces, at least to me, I mean, everyone's gonna have their favorite pieces, and it's just how it goes. But one of my favorite pieces that you did is on Star Trek Discovery soundtrack, the "It's You Saru" part, piece, and I really love it. And I think it's such a multifaceted piece as well, where it kind of starts off kind of a little buoyant, and then it kind of transitions to a little bit of sadness, and eventually kind of builds up to what I think is a very strong sounding piece of music, right at the end, where it sounds obviously more powerful. And once again, because it's, to me, surrounded by Saru, is that how you were envisioning the character, as and how he progressed in the story?
Well, that piece of music in particular, it's like, that entire piece of music traverses a lot of different moments in the storytelling of that particular episode. So it was like it was the building of those emotions. It started out being a little lighter than it becomes, and it becomes more emotional, and then it becomes hopeful,
Mm.
and then it becomes a little bit of a stronger piece of music. So it's interesting that you pick that particular piece of music, because it does sort of run the gamut of emotions
Mm.
for pieces of music. Um, I don't really look at it I don't really look at it specifically in terms of those individual parts. I sat and I sort of watched it, and that's where my hands sort of went for that particular moment, right?
Mm.
Like there's one feeling, and then there's the next feeling, and then there's the next feeling, and I'm just trying to follow along and support that narrative.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, that piece to me just feels like an entire story. I mean, I don't think it's a long. I think it's only like a minute and 40 seconds. I don't think it's a very long piece, but it feels like there's an entire story being told in that minute and 40 seconds just in music. And without seeing the character of Saru, even if you didn't know who the character Saru was, you get a lot of a sense of it just from hearing that one piece of a journey that this guy takes. And I think that's such a miraculous thing that can be done in such a short time with music. And like I said, that's why I was curious how you approach that.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that it is a lot to say in one piece of music, and it is, in that scene, so much happens for Saru. So much happens between Saru and Burnham in that scene,
Mm.
and because of that, a lot had to be said in music in a short time, with not a lot of not a lot of time to say it, and not a lot of things to use.
Mm. I guess another interesting about what Star Trek Discovery has done. I mean, there was quite a shift in seasons 2 and 3 from having going to the far future. Having that, obviously, that change from being a pre-original series Star Trek to being, I guess, post Star Trek that came out, so that takes place so far after what everyone was familiar with as the old series. Did that change as well the type of music you decide to use in the pieces you play, because it is now post the original, while the other one was kind of a prequel
Well,
to?
no, it hasn't changed, and that was the one thing that we discussed. I was like, we can't really all of a sudden try to make a score that's what's the music going to be like 1,000 years in the future. Like we're trying to tell the story the way Star Trek tells the story, the modern Star Trek tells the story. So we really didn't want to change. Like we needed new themes, we needed new
Mm.
motifs, there were new characters and new civilizations, and th- there was all of this stuff that I needed to be able to represent in music.
Mm.
Uh, Book, The Cat, Grudge,
Grudge.
like all of the stuff that I could use as fodder for coming up with new motifs. But I didn't want to change the sound of the music. I mean, I knew that there were going to be things that I couldn't do anymore, like I have this great theme from the Mirror universe, and I feel like we can't really use that until we go to the Mirror universe. You know what I mean? Like, and and I did, and I have utilized that again when we did go to the mirror
Yes.
universe in season 3. And you know, what I know is I'm sure we'll be back, and or, I mean, I don't know if we'll be back, but we could be. You know, Michelle could call me up and say, "Hey, we're doing another mirror universe episode. What do you got?" And I'd be like, "Well, I got the mirror universe theme." But um so yeah, there wasn't a big like thought to change anything just because the backdrop changed.
Hmm. When it let's say when you're going to with Discovery, um and you're planning for season 4 after which obviously hasn't the album hasn't been released yet. Are there pieces of music that you have kind of created prior to hearing a scene that you're now hoping to get a moment to introduce, or does it only come to you when the scene comes to you?
Uh, at this point, I'm really not writing or doing anything prior to seeing picture, so it really is just like what comes to me when I'm watching.
And I will have to say, and once again, as a fan of Discovery, obviously the season 4 album is not going to come out till well after season 4 is over. Um, can you give us any indication of how many tracks there are and anything we can look forward to in
Uh,
musically?
I can't. I mean, not that I'm not allowed to talk about it. Like, I honestly don't know. I'm still writing the episodes right now. I'm currently writing episode 11.
Oh
So
wow.
you know, uh, and because I'm still in the midst of it, I'm not even looking backwards to see what I would put on the record. You know what I mean? I have no
Yeah.
idea. I'm still like in process. I'm still writing season 2 of Picard. So I'm my hands are pretty full with that.
So what is that turnover time like? I mean, from the point where an episode is filmed to you're finally giving the music to start on it to the point where it's getting ready to have to be released to um I guess in this case Paramount Plus. What's that turnover time actually look like for you?
Well, remember that from the time they start filming, like that's months and months and months and months and months ago. I don't get a cut until they're pretty much finished with the editing of it, and then they
Hmm.
hand it to me, and I've got about 2 weeks,
Oh wow. Per
maybe.
episode?
Yeah, about two
Oh
weeks an episode, maybe sometimes three. The first episode I have a lot longer, like because there's a lot more lead time going up to the first episode. So maybe I have like 6 to 8 weeks for the first episode. But once we get
yeah.
into episode 3, I've got two weeks. Sometimes less, sometimes week and a half. Not a
You
lot.
don't have time for writer's block at all, do you? I mean, you can't just have like a bad couple of days where nothing's coming to you.
No, writer's block is not a thing. I mean, writer's block is a thing when you're trying to write something for yourself where you might get blocked on a new idea. But I don't have that luxury. I don't have the luxury of being able to have time to sit and try to write something for myself. I have a job to do, and I can't have writer's block. So you just write through writer's block. You have to just power through writer's block. You have to write something. Maybe it's not as good as the last thing you wrote, in which case you'll go back and look at it and redo it or something, but you can't have writer's block.
Are you able to give us a timeline of when we can expect a release of season 4's album?
You know, I actually was just talking about it, and I'm going to try to get it released by the time the finale airs, but I don't know that that's going to be possible. And usually, what that will entail is it'll be a digital only release, and then maybe we'll do vinyl at some point. I don't think we're doing CDs anymore. I don't think the record company that puts out the records for Star Treks, I don't think that they do CDs really anymore. But I would say it's going to be, you know, before the summer. That's for sure.
So, what can our listeners look forward to from you and other things that you may? Are there other projects you work on that are non Star Trek related as well that you may be working on?
Yes, there are. There's a lot of fun stuff that I'm working on. A lot of stuff I can't really talk about.
Oh, that's fine.
And and it's interesting. It's like when because I work on some pretty high profile things, and when I do, it's the kind of thing where they really say, no, don't talk about it until we talk about it. But I'm continuing my work on a show called For All Mankind, which is a great show on Apple Plus. I don't know if you know of it, but it's a really great show. It's really fun, and it's a really deep look at what could have been. I mean, at least season one was a little like that, and season two continues that thing, and now we're working on season three. So that's a lot of fun. Um, and really, that's most of the things I can talk about. We're in the middle of writing and working on season three of The Umbrella Academy as well.
Oh, I love that. That show really is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
It's a phenomenal show. It must be kind of fun to get all the material before anyone else gets to see it, to get the first look and see what is going on and everything.
I mean, the unfortunate part of getting the first look is I don't ever get to really see the finished work, right? Like,
Mm.
so all the cuts that I get, Star Trek, Umbrella Academy, Picard, all of it, it's all pre-visual effects. So, I get to see like a person dressed in green holding something, you know what I mean? And then what you end up seeing is the thing floating and nobody standing there in a green suit. Um, you know, so that's unfortunate, but I do get to see it early. That's fun.
Is it harder then to try to visualize what's happening in the scene where when so much, I mean, especially once again discovering Picard, extremely CGI heavy, if you're not visually being able to see a lot of what's supposed to be there, is that are you kind of guessing what's supposed to be happening and feeling like? And is that, is that kind of strange? Have you ever had it where you guess wrong and you're like,
No, I
wait a
mean,
second?
they're very clear. Like, it's hard to explain, but when I get a cut, if there is a shot that there is supposed to be a very heavy VFX part, is there will be written words on the screen telling me exactly what I'm going to see. Now, granted, the words don't really do it, so I have to use my imagination.
Right.
But I do kind of know what is going to be there. Timing is always a little funny, right? And that's a guess, but a lot of times they give the music to the VFX people, and then the VFX people start to sort of cut around the music. So
Well, like I said, I really loved what you did with the Star Trek Discovery. I'm a big fan of Star Trek Picard, and once again, I'm a big fan of Tonic. I want to thank you so much for speaking with me. It was a great thrill, and it's a great moment, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a fantastic night.
You too.